Congressman, let's just jump right in here. The House Freedom Caucus holding a big press conference earlier this morning. What do you guys have on your mind?
Well, it was in part response to the president rolling out his $6.9 trillion budget yesterday. He wants to throw gasoline on the raging fiscal fire of, $32 trillion national debt's not enough for him. $1 trillion deficits are not enough for him. So he projects proposes a $6.9 trillion budget, largest budget in the history of the country, greatest increase in spending in the history of the country, projects a $2 trillion deficit. It's literally a 56% increase over 4 years ago pre-COVID spending at a time when the pandemic is over, of course. And it's dead on arrival, of course. We're not going to take that up. It's literally $20,000 per American citizen when you take $6.9 trillion and you divide that by roughly 340 million American citizens. It's just over $20,000 per citizen, or say a household of 2.5 average, then that would be approximately $50,000 per household. No American would vote for that, of course. So we don't have the money, and we're not going to do that. But secondly, his policies are harming the country. So the House Freedom Caucus, we've been working on this for several weeks, as you know, and we went ahead and held a press conference today and did a release on what our spending plan is, which has immediate cuts and then longer-term spending reforms. And it really attacks the woke and weaponized federal government, the bureaucracy that's harming the American people. And I'd be glad to drill down a little bit in some details with you if you like.
Yeah. Well, first I want to address some of the things you just said, because it seems to me the president is just clearly unserious about this. Here we are having a raging battle right now over whether or not the debt ceiling is going to get raised. And then the president hands down a budget which is just simply not sustainable.
No question. It's not a question of if we're going to cut spending this year. It's how much we're going to cut spending, what kind of spending that we're going to cut, how far we're going to go, and how united we can keep the Republican Party towards that, how far we can go together. Speaker McCarthy and the Republicans are united that we're going to cut spending. It's just a question of how much. We made history 2 months ago with fighting against the status quo from a leadership standpoint and putting reforms in place, changing how Congress works. We're going to make history again, Todd, where we haven't cut spending meaningful basis in decades in this town, and we're going to do it here in 2023. We're going to do it in 2024. That's the only thing the most important thing is not the long-term projections and plans for how we're going to balance in 10 years or however many years. That's important. That's a framework. That's an aspirational thing. What matters is this year and next year, real cuts, meaningful cuts that make a dent in the national debt and the deficit, I should say specifically, and we're going to do that.
One of the things I really appreciate about your plan is to actually embrace the Bill Clinton era work requirements on welfare.
Yeah.
I think for me, and we're going to get to that in a second, but Congressman, just imagine how far the Democrat Party has moved to the left when they were the ones who actually embraced these ideas of, hey, you got to, if you're going to get on welfare, you got to show us you're out there trying to get a job.
No question. There are 3 million less Americans working today than there were when Biden became president. And then not only is it costing us, we're estimating we're going to be able to save about $30 billion a year on the spending side by having able-bodied Americans return to work. So not only is there an economic budgetary savings there, but it will fuel the economy. Job creators, employers, and businesses cannot increase productivity, cannot invest in their businesses the way they want to in terms of growing that business without workers. And so there's a cultural component to it. There's a moral virtue that's part of work where we're hurting our country or hurting our society. We're also, we're spending money to provide federal subsistence to people who are able to work, but then also we're holding back our economy. This president is projecting to continue like the anemic 1% economic growth. We got to get back to Trump's pro-growth policies, 3 to 4% growth, which means cutting the regulations again instead of increasing them. It means keeping Trump's tax cuts in place and cutting taxes even more. It means getting Americans back to work, as you've just noted there. and it means unleashing American energy again. All those are critical to getting the economy churning again, which will mean we can get to fiscal balance more quickly than we can with just trying to cut our way there alone. So we got to cut the spending, no question, but we also got to get Americans back to work, get the economy going again.
Congressman Bob Good on the Patriot Mobile Newsmaker line. Congressman, you mentioned woke spending. Give us an idea of some of the wokeness that you guys are tackling here.
Well, in the short run, we want to address there's $100 billion in unspent COVID money that's still just sitting in the federal treasury, hasn't been allocated, hasn't been spent yet. We're going to claw that back. We want to claw back the $80 billion allocated to fund the 87,000 new IRS agents, which we don't need. You know, the poor, lower income and middle income Americans are audited about 5 times that of wealthy Americans. There's not enough billionaires and millionaires to keep these 87,000 IRS agents busy. We don't want them harassing, threatening, intimidating regular Americans. So we're going to rescind the $80 billion there. There's a few hundred billion dollars of green climate, environmental, green raw deal stuff from the phony infrastructure bill, from the phony inflation increase bill, as well as the omnibus spending bill. We're going after that in this bill. But then also, when we're going to cut the spending back to the 2019 levels in discretionary non-defense spending, which will save about $150 billion a year. But what that will force is our appropriators to look at each department, each agency, each part of the bureaucracy and say, okay, where are we going to cut? And we're going to try to force them to cut the wokiness that's in the diversity, equity, and inclusion, the environment, climate extremism, and the stuff that just isn't justified for us to be borrowing money to, whether it's to send it overseas or to do things that the American people just don't want us to do.
All right, good stuff. Well, Congressman, we appreciate the update. And just, again, unserious, insane. The administration's out of their minds here. And we're, like you said, I'm glad to hear you say it, dead on arrival. Congressman, thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Todd. You as well.